To me, the aha moment is essentially the promise fulfillment. It's the fulfillment of the promises made earlier on when they were on your site, when they were talking to your sales team. And that fulfillment of that promise is when they're like, oh, okay, there's a misalignment between those two things where your sales team and marketing team is over promising and your product team is under delivering. That's going to be really hard. There's no product tour or human interaction or educational content that's going to help fix that onboarding problem, because that it started from the beginning where the messaging or the positioning is. Onboarding is not a product problem. It is not a customer success problem. It is a business problem that needs to be tackled by the whole company if they want to really impact early stage retention.
In today's episode, we're going to talk about building habit-forming hybrid onboarding, how to guide users from your first value to enterprise success in B2B SaaS. My guest is Ramli John, also known as RJ. RJ is the author of the best-selling book Product-Led Onboarding and is currently working on his next book, Eureka, the product onboarding playbook for B2B companies, launching in June 2025. Ramli works hands-on with SaaS companies to help them improve user activation, retention, revenue growth, which kind of means he has seen the inside of many different SaaS companies and the data related to their onboarding. So we'll dive today into why self-serve onboarding is no longer sufficient, how to build scalable hybrid experience for different customer segments, and how to drive users to value faster while setting the foundation for long-term success. Welcome, RJ.
Joran, it's nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
We're going to dive right in. Why is creating a habit-forming onboarding so important for B2B SaaS today?
Yeah, it is really so important. I think people forget about it because product teams are so focused on launching new features and marketing and sales is so focused on trying to get new signups that this middle ground is often forgotten. I call it the ugly duckling of growth because it's often the one that's forgotten. And the reason why it's so important is there's data shows that first few, and we intuitively know this as people, that the first few seconds, the first few minutes, first few hours that you have with a product or a person really sticks around and it has long-term impact. There's a study from Profitwell that they found studying 500 or so B2B SaaS companies. They are analytics companies, so they have this, is that if a user or a person has a great onboarding experience in that first few hours, it turns into a 2 to 3x increase in terms of retention after 9 weeks. It's also a study from Inner Trends, another analytics company, where they found a similar trend where if you can keep those users engaged in that first week, the 12-week impact in terms of retention is a lot higher. I'm talking about retention, but also Profitwell found that the likeliness of someone to pay after a great onboarding experience is a lot higher. That's the reason why it's so important. Often it's the only thing that people will see in your product after they bounce off. Unfortunately, a lot of products, their onboarding experience is not that great. Like there's studies from different companies where like 40 to even up to 80% of new users sign up once and then they don't come back for SaaS companies. It is important, but often forgotten and missed.
Yeah, and it makes sense. So if 40 to 80% don't come back after onboarding, you already say what the impact could be when you have a really good onboarding to your SaaS.
Exactly. Just a little bit of lift there has longer term. In fact, I call it the snowball effect. If you can start with something small and impactful in the early stages, then it can turn into longer term results and outcome.
We're going to talk about how to implement proper onboarding step by step. First, I'm going to ask about a misconception people have about onboarding. What kind of misconceptions do you see in the market right now with SaaS companies or SaaS founders?
It's often think about the onboarding itself, something that happens in the product. I think that's often missed, how the onboarding, it's okay, now they're in, let's start the onboarding process. I would argue that specifically for SaaS companies where the onboarding actually starts before they get into the product. Because I like to see it as they're not just onboarding them to the product, you're actually onboarding them to a new way of doing things, a new way of life, a new way of doing their work. And it starts from the beginning where they first encounter your product in an ad on the search page, where you're actually onboarding them to the idea or the promise about what your product can do, how it can change your life. And that is often the work of product marketing or messaging, positioning. Even in the sales pitch, where the sales team is pitching your product to a prospect, they're giving a promise. They're onboarding that prospect into a concept, an idea, a new way of life, a new workflow. When they get into the product, it's now you're onboarding them to the reality of that promise. So it goes from promise made to promise fulfillment. And that's why if there's a misalignment between those two things, where your sales team and marketing team is over promising and your product team is under delivering, that's going to be really hard. There's no product tour or human interaction or educational content that's going to help fix that onboarding problem, because that it started from the beginning where the messaging or the positioning is off. That's a big misconception, and that's the reason why it just gets to me. It gets to me when, so we have an onboarding problem. Let's get the product team involved and let them do their thing. Don't bother marketing or sales or customer success. Particularly for SaaS companies, I would say that it needs to be a cross-functional effort if you're trying to improve your onboarding, because it does impact from the beginning all the way into their full life cycle, and it needs to be a whole problem. I recently read a post, somebody shared my idea around this, where onboarding is not a product problem. It is not a customer success problem. It is a business problem that needs to be tackled by the whole company if they want to really impact early stage retention.
Yeah, it makes sense. If you bring in the wrong companies promising something wrong from the beginning, a product is not going to solve it. I used to be head of customer success, and we always said we're sometimes filling up a leaking bucket in a way if you're not actually getting the right clients. And of course, that's one step further or two steps further. Still, same principle applies here. What is a common mistake across many SaaS companies when it comes to onboarding, or even before that?
I would say that a common mistake that companies make when it comes to onboarding is, I recently shared a post about this on LinkedIn, how the tendency, maybe just for me, but I'm finding a lot of teams do this, is, oh, let's fix our onboarding. Let's figure out the right tool. Let's start building and designing and looking at what best practices are on how to do this. But I would say that the most impactful thing that you can do if you're going to start your onboarding, fixing your onboarding experience, is really starting off with looking at what your current users are doing. What are the best users doing? I'm not just saying let's dig into analytics. That's true. You can look at where people are dropping off. But what I really like to do, especially for companies that have onboarding calls for like high touch or even early stage, I know we're going to get into this a little bit, but if you're early stage, pre-product market fit or below 10K MRR, I suggest that often that you actually don't take a product-led approach. You take a very high-touch approach, because you're maximizing for learning. And you're, during those onboarding call recordings with customers, I'm watching out for two things. First of all, where are the moments of confusion where the customer or the user is asking, like, what does this mean? Or they have that face that looks confused and they're like, can you repeat that? What is that? How do you? So that's a great place to identify, people are confused. Are we describing it wrong? Are we overwhelming them the way we're describing this? So the moments of confusion, and the other one is the moments of delight. So identify moments where they're actually physically, viscerally leaning into the call, and they're saying words like, oh, what? Or aha. They're giving you visual, auditory cues that this part in the product is actually where they're getting excited about it. Now you start thinking, okay, interesting. How do I scale this up in the product? How would I scale this up in other places? Human interaction, and trying to figure out exactly where that is. So I think that's where I would start. I would try to understand those moments of confusion, those moments of delight, and then I can start thinking about, okay, how do I build an experience that kind of caters and drives people away from confusion but towards delight?
Yeah, and that's the part of onboarding, right? Where you get them from confusion to delight. What you see sometimes at SaaS companies, they try to get a lot of information from the user. How would you look at that? In your case, you're saying you need to get them from confusion to delight, take them on that journey probably from how to fix a certain problem with your SaaS. What would you recommend the goal of good onboarding should be?
I would say that, to your point, great onboarding drives people away from confusion. I think that's especially for more complex B2B SaaS. Let's talk about the opposite first. What does a terrible experience look like? It would be confusion, it would be overwhelm. And for a lot of B2B SaaS or SaaS companies where you have multiple features, you might have multiple products. How do you drive them towards that? So, how do you avoid that particularly? Success is really about getting them to what they want as quickly as possible. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, what was the promise made to them when they read your homepage or they read your site or your pricing page or talked to your sales team? There was a perception formed in their mind as to what your product can do to make it easier for their lives or their work. And they've signed up and okay, now it's time for me to experience this. And the goal of the successful onboarding is getting them to that promise fulfillment or that promise completion, getting them to the promised land so that they can say, okay, I get it now. I totally understand what this product does. So that's where it is. And getting them there, people call that as the activation moment. Some people call it as the aha moment. I like calling it as the ultimate win. What is the ultimate win for the user? What is that thing that they were looking for that they finally says, yes, I finally got it. And they're ready to dig deeper into the product itself.
Yeah. If somebody thinks, oh yeah, this is not what our onboarding does right now, and they're like, I need to start changing our onboarding. Like, for example, ourselves, we're actually changing our onboarding as we speak, and I might create new tickets based off this conversation afterwards. How would I go about step by step improving my onboarding? You already mentioned find the moments of confusion, find the moments of delight on the journey, but any other processes, frameworks, things we should consider?
The best onboarding experiences do, if you look at Mural or Canva, is really try to understand what are the core use cases or the promises that your product make. In interior wise or framework wise, it's called the job speed the interior. Some people are familiar with this, but the idea is people hire products to do a job for them, quote unquote, a job. And when you hire a tool like LinkedIn to connect with people, or you hire, let's say, HubSpot to build deeper relationship at scale with your customers, whatever that is, try to understand those ones and really understanding what those are can help you ask the question up front. Try to figure out exactly why your users are signing up. So often the best onboarding experiences ask, why did you sign up? What is your primary use case for signing up for our product? Because that kind of helps you now to understand, okay, they said this, let me bring them to that promised land, to that endpoint, that goal, or that desired outcome as quickly as possible, because they have it signified to me that's what they want particularly. And I think that's the next step. Break it down step by step. Figure out exactly what your product's use cases are, or the primary top 3 use cases, or why are they signing up. Second would be like try to figure out the endpoint of that. What is that thing that they want, the desired outcome. And the third is now how do you build an experience that kind of gets them there and guide them particularly to that spot and help them.
Yeah. When you say ask them what is the primary use case of you signing up, we did it before, for example, in a field where they can just fill out whatever they want. That's what people do. And in the end, like it becomes quite useless and people get lazy and they just fill in random keywords sometimes. Would you, I guess, I know, for example, HubSpot does it well, where they also have, I guess, jobs to be done. You want to do this and the product relates to that. Is it always pre-selective and based on that you map out the onboarding?
Early on, if you're not sure yet exactly what those primary use cases are, I would probably make it more open-ended. We did that once at AppQs, actually, when I was working in AppQs, a product onboarding software, where we would just ask, what are you using AppQs for? And it was open-ended, and we got some surprising responses. I don't recall them, but it was like, why? That's an interesting thing that I didn't consider before. And those things are impactful or interesting or helpful, because now you're like, how many people are doing it like this or using my product this way? And then if there is enough, then that could be the option. So starting off open-ended to maximize learning, it does increase friction because you're maximizing learning. And then later down is now you're optimizing for completion. So in that case, you probably want to pre-select the top 3. Typically, it's 3 because over that, it's overwhelming. And then there's often a field other, and the other one can be a catch-all where like they click that and it open up open field that they can type in exactly what they're looking for. So that's ideally the process you would go through, starting off if you're not familiar with it is yet.
Yeah. Makes sense. You mentioned early stage, take a high touch approach, definitely do onboarding calls where you're going to learn about things, get those aha moments. But when we talk about, for example, when you're a bit later stage and you're going to focus on enterprise, and this is also where I guess the hybrid onboarding probably comes into play, how would you recommend onboarding them where the app isn't enough or a product isn't enough to onboard them?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways to take this approach of trying to figure out exactly when the hybrid approach or human approach comes in. I like to think about it as a 2x2 matrix, where at the very bottom could be like the average contract value. And then at the on the side, the y-axis is the product engagement. So if they're like high contract value and they're like highly engaged, I would help them right away with humans because first of all, they're right in our fit. Their customer fit is perfect. They're highly engaged. I think that's when I would get in there because particularly if I'm talking more like enterprise B2B SaaS, where the true value of those kind of products is not like a single user, but it's one champion who's engaged in like inviting their whole colleagues, like 60 of them. How do I tap into that excitement right away and bring them through that experience so that we give them resources to champion the product? On the other hand, low contract value and high engagement. In those cases, I would probably think more about one-to-many approach. There's this whole field in customer success that's come up in the last couple of years around scaled customer success or digital customer success. You're probably quite familiar with this. I'm seeing it more and more. Companies like Full Story, Mixpanel, they have a whole dedicated team now called digital or scaled customer success. Even at AppQs, when I was working there, I left last year and they were hiring for that particular role. So I think those ones where it's low contract value and highly engaged, it could be an interesting approach where you do one-to-many. On the bottom end where it's like high contract value and like low engagement, I think that's like a massive red flag. In that case, they're like a big company. They're like you've used third-party tools, like something that Apollo or something else that have let you know that, oh, they work at a big company like Microsoft, let's say. Somebody from Microsoft signed up for your product and you're like, oh my goodness, we need to pursue this. They're not engaging. I would say that's when it gets tricky. How do you engage them? How do you identify them? How do you reach out to them? And there's a few strategies to try to figure that out. You might have to take more of a sales/CS approach where you reach out to them or you figure out what went wrong. Maybe they're stuck and they had some technical issues that you need to help them out. So I'll really investigate that a little bit more because it's a massive red flag. The other one that I didn't talk about, the low ACV, the low contract value and low engagement, I call that the graveyard. Maybe you can automate out, like you can help automate automation through in-product or educational content or emails. But in that case, since it's a low contract value and they're not engaging well, then I would consider how much human touch you would approach there.
Yeah, because in the end, I think we have a saying in Dutch where it's like pulling a dead cow out of a pond. You can do a lot of work, but in the end, you probably won't move the needle that much. It's a good one, calling it graveyard or a dead cow pulling out of the pond.
Are you struggling to find a cost-effective and scalable marketing channel? Check out Redditis. We help you to have other people recommend your SaaS and you would only pay them when they deliver you paid clients, making it a very cost-effective and scalable marketing channel. Want to learn more? Go to getredditis.com.
When people look into improving their product onboarding, you helped a lot of companies, right? Where do they struggle the most? What kind of challenges do they keep running into? And maybe some ideas on how to overcome those.
Often the challenge is not knowing where to start. Where do we drive them to? And then this framework, it really does help, like breaking down what is the job to be done and like how do we get them there, and then building that experience out. Because often I think this is especially for companies where, once again, there's a lot of options. There's a lot of use cases, a lot of features. It becomes like the user comes in, they're like, oh, let's give you a tour. Here's where this button does. Here's another area. Here's another thing. So it really is a tour. It's a overview tour. And those things are not very helpful at all because that's just information. It's not transformation. It's a saying where it's not helping me transform my approach, my workflow, my thinking. What I often take, especially if it's going to be a walkthrough, is very action driven and focus. By completing this, you'll be able to do Y. By completing this walkthrough or this tour, you'll now be able to set up your social media profile or something like that. So it's very targeted towards an action rather than an overview approach. So I would say that's where things go wrong, is just becoming, here's everything. Or I've come in once where they had an onboarding checklist. I was helping out this company and they had a checklist came up. There was like 8 items. None of them are checked off. So I'm like, I have to do 8 things. Oh my goodness, there's so many things. So I suggested they break it down step by step, right? They break it down into 3 checklists that kind of help them structure their approach there.
Yeah. Let me give you our case right now. We help SaaS companies set up an in-app referral program with a freemium model. They just sign up. They need to basically install a tracker script, a sign-up snippet, and connect their payment processor. 3 things they need to do. But then in the end, they get embedded within their app where the users start recommending them. Before they get one in their dashboard, it takes quite a bit of effort from them. Would you recommend us, for example, showing dummy data, showing like a guide rather than pushing them to do all those steps, and then in the end it might never happen? Like, what is a recommendation here when it's a bit more technical product?
They have to set up a code in their website.
Yeah, twice. So once by a marketer and once by a developer, and that's where all the friction comes.
That's huge. We had the same problem at AppQs. Is there anything they can set up beforehand before they can install that into their site? Like maybe set up their referral program names and things like that?
They could, but in the end, our product wouldn't deliver value, I guess, if they don't do the scripts.
It's a good question. There's a few ways to take this. I think you mentioned dummy data. That is something that is helpful that I would experiment with. And maybe even creating them like that would be helpful. That is something that a company like Amplitude does, where you have graphs or charts that show like once they have data, like, oh, here's a referral program and here's how much you made or something like that. Is that something that's part of the product?
It is definitely part of the product. So asking people to recommend the SaaS company, they would get a commission, swag, whatever the SaaS company wants to give away.
Yeah, in that case, dummy data would be helpful. Amplitude does something like that, where part of their onboarding is asking you what kind of company you are. Are you a SaaS? Are you e-commerce? Are you a marketplace? And then it would show a relevant chart based on that. In this case, that is possible. It does require like coding, and it requires an engineering team. A second approach as an experiment is using an in-product interactive demo where they can walk through it. I know a company like Deal has used it to walk through the HR process. Setting up HR is complicated, so they actually use Novatic to kind of show what their experience looks once it's fully filled out. That's a few things. First of all, it gets them excited. So, okay, now I see this. Let me start setting up my stuff and getting going with that. And then secondly, not just motivated, but it actually shows them what an outcome can look like so that they have a visualization of what exactly that is. So that would be helpful in that case. The other thing that I would try to get them to set up things before asking them to install that code. They might not see the stuff, but visualize it. Once they have investment into it, there's this psychology principle called the IKEA effect. Since they're investing into customizing, they're more like, okay, I've invested this much already, might as well keep going. I think that's valuable in that sense, where I know this is something that Drift did much earlier on. One of their onboarding steps. So Drift, for people not familiar, it's a chatbot, right? It helps with support. One of the early steps they had was to name your chatbot. I found that giving a name to a chatbot helps you personalize the chatbot so that you're like, oh my goodness, I already gave it a name. Might as well install the Drift code to my website because I've already personalized it. Might as well go through it. So that's another experiment that you can approach. Where is there a way to help them customize this already so that they're more invested into it?
Yeah, this makes a lot of logical sense. I love the Drift example as well, because you're creating something, not a person, but creating something where you're almost killing it when you're not completing the steps you need to do. I guess one other thing, I want to start changing my onboarding. What is one simple thing they could maybe start off today with? Could be, I guess, figuring out the jobs to be done, or is there any other things they could be doing today to prepare themselves for creating a better onboarding?
I would say it starts there. Talking to users and seeing onboarding calls is a great place to start. I get excited when working with a company and they're onboarding their customers right now, human touch. because there's so much insights there that's untapped. I know for the longest time, our growth product mindset, even customer success, is been all data driven. So what does a chart say? What is the correlation from this to that? Where's the biggest drop off? Like that shares a lot of what is happening, but the why part, why are people not doing that? Why are people struggling here? There's so much insights when you interact with a user, and it is also one approach. If I'm able to talk to a client's customer, I would love to do that. I'm often held back. So my second best is analyze their onboarding calls and give that. So I think that's a great place to start. Also, tapping into your team members who are already front facing, like customer success and sales, because they have a ton of insight around where are people getting stuck, where are people confused when you do the sales pitch, or where are people getting confused when you're doing those onboarding calls. I'm taking a cross-functional approach, almost like a growth team approach, when I'm helping a team improve their onboarding and getting them on the same room and asking the question like, what is our aha moment? Are we on the same page about that is our activation moment? Because often, even where I used to work at AppQs, where I asked somebody from product, I asked somebody from customer success and marketing, what is our aha moment? I got 3 different responses. that's not a great place to start, and aligning on what that is already a win, because you can drive an in-product experience, a human touch approach in onboarding emails and the messaging towards that particular moment in the journey. It's not scattered and everybody rolling in different directions.
Yeah, I can imagine though it's hard to find one aha moment, especially if you have multiple features.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Multiple products. How would you go about that?
It goes back to what we mentioned. If they have multiple use cases, you could have multiple aha moments or activation moments. To me, the aha moment is essentially the promise fulfillment. It's the fulfillment of the promises made earlier on when they were on your site, when they were talking to your sales team. And that fulfillment of that promise is when they're like, oh, okay, I get it now. The connection from the before of what they thought it was to and perception to actually experiencing it is the aha moment. Obviously, you can use data and do what Facebook did and say, oh, I'm just 7 friends, add 7 friends in 10 days, things like that. I'm actually much more simplified version of that just focus on getting the user to do that one thing once, and then getting them to do it a second time is a win already. So rather than complicating it with X and Y and doing this and that, get that user to do that promise fulfillment moment is, to me, a win already. To get them to repeat it is another win, because onboarding is not just a one-time moment. It has to be about habit formation, and habits takes repetition, right? When you're trying to build a habit about going to the gym or writing a journal, you're not like, you did it once and I'm like, I'm done. I've built my habit. No, you have to do it over 30 days or however many days it takes. And that's when you can say I've built the habit around it. And also true for a product. They need to do that a few times before you can say, oh, they've built a habit.
Yeah, so it's not just signing up to Facebook and finding 7 friends and never come back and still be a great onboarded user. It's actually coming back and doing things multiple times. Would you have any recommendations on how to build habits? I think it's the most difficult thing to do. You said 40 to 80% never come back after onboarding. So how to properly onboard them and then also create these habits?
I will break it down into stages. I would think about it in the first hour, right? In the first hour, first day. That's where the most drop off happens. Getting them to a quick win, a same day win. How do you get them into a win within that first day? And for a lot of products, unfortunately, that's not the promise fulfillment, especially in B2B, where even at AppQs, for us, our promise fulfillment was getting them to install a code snippet, launching a product tour, and getting it live and their users seeing that product tour. Sometimes that took, we found it took 14 to 30 days for a customer to finally get that. Hoping that it happens in day one is crazy. So same day window we focus on is getting them to start building, going back to the IKEA effect, and installing the builder so that they can start designing what their tour can look like and customizing and things like that. So that's the first stage, is like focus on the same day win. The next stage is focus on the week 1 win. So like, how do you get them to continue having wins that first week? right? What is the next step in getting that win? For us, it was finally testing internally or inviting a team member to give feedback on that product tour, whatever that week one win is, that kind of propels them to hopefully in the first month win and in the 90-day wins. I'm thinking of it in stages of win milestones along the way, because then that helps them see progress and build that habit rather than seeing the end in mind. This is too long, impossible, it's going to take forever. I have to get these people involved. Start off breaking it down to milestones rather than starting with a big one.
Yeah. Would you recommend finding these wins first and putting them on onboarding emails or materials you have? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. How do you see the future of onboarding, especially with the new AI tools? You have, I guess, the interactive onboarding, right? What is your opinion here?
The future of onboarding with AI. I've been thinking a lot about this lately. I think we're only on the very early stages of seeing AI's true power, and this is what people are saying, of course. But when it comes to onboarding, right now, where we're at with onboarding and AI, what I'm seeing companies like User Pilot do and other tools is it's more generative AI. They're using AI to help you write your product or your content. I truly see a world where it's something that Duolingo does, but at scale. What Duolingo does, I was listening to a podcast with Duolingo, and what I didn't know this, they use AI for something really cool. They have thousands of iterations of messaging, right? When you're Duolingo is like this easy way to learn a language, but they've been experimenting with figuring out the right messaging prompt or mobile prompt to get you to come back to Duolingo. And they have negative prompts like, oh, Ramli, you're so lazy or something like that. Come back, please. Obviously, that's not what it says, but it's an exaggeration. Or is it a positive prompt where oh, you're 3 days in, keep going or something like that? They have like thousands of this. And they've used AI to analyze your habits, what works for you, what brought you back, and all that things to hyper personalize an experience to get you to come back. And I feel like that's where it's going to go towards, where rather than using it for messaging and getting people to come back, it's about hyper personalizing an experience, particularly for that user. So right now, when you need to design those use cases, so what is your primary use case? A human would have to design a flow, particularly experience, a step-by-step experience to get a user towards that end goal, that end promise, that desired outcome. I see a world where AI can build that experience so everybody sees a different guide or different options, whether you're a visual learner, an auditory learner, or whether you like product tours. Some people hate it. Or do you like videos? Crafting an experience particularly for you based on what it knows about you when you were surfing on the site. Did you click on videos? Did you do this? Would be super cool, because now it's like a hyper personalized to your learning style and also what your preferences are particularly.
Yeah, I love it, because I know Duolingo does a lot of experimentation. They have the bird. Sometimes the bird is sad. Sometimes the bird is happy.
So good. So good.
And I think that's nice. For some people, it works when the bird gets sad, and some people think, I don't care about the bird being sad. So I think it's nice to have like thousands of different iterations to find out like what works best for RJ and what works best for Joran.
Yeah, so true. What works best for everyone and what works best for particularly for that user. And you could have thousands of iteration of that same messaging, and that would be hard to scale up if it wasn't for AI. Now you don't have just one person writing or designing it. You have somebody helping you.
Yeah. And it goes really well to my next question. So what is the biggest risk or opportunity SaaS founders should prepare for right now?
I would say it is the danger of the shiny object syndrome, where it's easy to be distracted with slapping on AI or adding this on. Or I understand, I've been exploring it myself. I think there has been a lot of hype around AI companies, and the investment into AI companies has been super big. A lot of products have shifted their positioning from product to like product, AI powered product. Everything's AI powered. I understand that, but I would be cautious to make sure that it is adding value to the users. It goes back to what users are A common misconception about product-led growth is that it's about product users and product teams, empowering thing. For me, product-led growth is really about making sure users are successful as much as they can, the end users. And that applies here. Is doing this, is adding AI or making AI powered, adding value? Is it making my users more successful than they currently are? Are they a better version of themselves because of this? Would be something that I would be cautious of, because it could be tempting to just add it on because everybody else is doing it. It's almost like peer pressure is what I'm seeing happening right now. And I think it's going to continue happening this year, especially as people talk a lot about potential recession. How do we drive more revenue? Let's add AI power to our product and we can drive revenue. Then you look back, it's like it actually didn't, because we just added it without thinking through exactly will it add value to our customers and users.
Nice. If you had to summarize your best advice on SaaS onboarding in 1 or 2 sentences,
One or two
what would
sentences
you say?
I already gave it a little bit of a head in the last question, is that if I had to give advice, ask yourself this: how do I make my end user as successful as they can be? That will do wonders. And that kind of responds to, should I add humans in the whole process? Because sometimes adding humans can help users become more successful. Or should I make it more self-serve? It's about going back to that question. Will this help me make my users more successful than they really are?
Nice. We're going to go to the final 2 questions. These are more revenue related questions. You can take it broad, you can keep it on onboarding. But when we talk about growing a B2B SaaS, like what kind of advice would you give a SaaS founder who's just starting out and growing from 0 to 10K monthly recurring revenue?
I would say for those early stage ones from 0 to 10K revenue, your job, your focus right now is really about maximizing learning, because you're trying to validate or invalidate your assumptions. And for me, when it comes to our topic of onboarding, the most learning you can get is talking to the customer and onboarding high touch. I know that doesn't make sense. It doesn't scale. And what Paul Graham, the founder of YC, said, do things that don't scale early on. And part of that is doing those calls high touch. It's something that Rahul Gaurav, which is the founder of Superhuman, talked a lot about in actually a recent first round article, where he said that early on, that's exactly what they did. They onboarded every single people to an email product, an email tool that replaced Gmail. That's like, why? Like, people know how to use email. Like, it's been around for decades. It's because he said, hey, we are maximizing learning. And then the next step, once they have it now, they've actually created a self-serve product now, a self-serve onboarding. All of their learnings they applied to help them design an experience that tackles confusion and delight all at the same time. So I think that's where I would advise them to resist the temptation to make it self-serve from the get-go, because then you would miss out on a ton of those insights that you might.
Yeah, you won't get all the insights from the customers to figure actually out where are they being stuck. Let's assume we are now past 10K MRR and we're going to make a huge step. I know we're going to grow towards 10 million ARR. What kind of advice would you give SaaS founders here?
Yeah, at this point now, there's this whole organizations around success, product, marketing. And the real true challenge is now about aligning everybody on the same team, getting everybody rolling on the same team. And that's where I think this is where it's now thinking about organization. How do I make sure that multiple team members from different functions are working together? There's multiple ways they can do this. They can create temporary growth pods that we did at AppQs, where I was in marketing, somebody was in product, somebody was in design. We're tackling specific problems around activation, retention, and for a short amount of time, 3 to 6 months. Or you can take an approach that HubSpot or Amplitude does, where they have full orgs that are cross-functional that tackle those particular part of the funnel. So I think that's where, at that point, now I'm thinking about how do I make sure my team members continue to talk to each other. That's where the unlock can happen, when you have insight from customer success, sales flowing into product and marketing to inform them with each other. Because at that point, a lot of people have specialized in their particular role. And in that case, I'm thinking a lot about how do I make sure that they're continuing to be aligned with each other.
Yeah, goes really well to what you said at the beginning. It is a business problem, so you need to keep talking to each other. Nice. Let me see if I can try to summarize. When we talk about building a habit-forming Hybrid onboarding, first of all, I guess like why? The first impression has the long-term effect. So 2 to 3 times increase in retention when users have a good onboarding, because in the end, often 40 to 80% don't come back after your onboarding. As you mentioned, onboarding is a business problem. Onboarding starts even before the product. So onboarding them with the ID. What do you want to change? Figure out the jobs to be done, find the desired outcome, and how to build the experience to basically get there. Onboarding calls will help find the moments of confusion and delights, especially the aha moments. It's even nicer when they actually say it. And then, of course, ask what is the primary use case of signing up. Great onboarding guides people away from confusion, experience what is promised on the site. To come back to that, focus on first day win, first week win, first month win, 90-day win, and then map out the journey from there. When you talk about enterprise, you can take a hybrid approach, high ACV and high engagement, jump in right away. When you have a more technical product, use dummy data or showcase the outcome via an interactive demo and have the technical steps at the end so they can actually get more invested before they have to do those. For the future, hyper-personalize, leveraging AI to find the perfect messaging. Great example from Duolingo. Avoid the shiny object syndrome. Don't add AI just for the sake of it. And when you're early stage company, take a high touch approach, do onboarding calls, make questions more open-ended to maximize learning. Later stage, align the organization to tackle certain challenges together. All your words.
Thank you.
We're going to wrap things up. If people want to get in contact with you, RJ, how can they do so?
Yeah, people can find me on LinkedIn, Ramli John. My new book, people can check it out, eurekabook.co. That's coming out in June 2025. And you can read a sample there, the first 3 chapters for free, if that's something that you want to take a look at. And then, of course, if it's before June, they can pre-order it with some pre-order bonuses. And after that, they can directly purchase it there as well. eurekabook.co.
Perfect. We're going to definitely add a link to it. And you even have an onboarding towards your own book where people can get the first 3 months or first 3 chapters, and then they can onboard into the book, and then they find
exactly
the moments.
Free trial.
It's perfect. Like they're already vested, because they already read the first 2 chapters. So why not read the whole book? Perfect.
That's true.
Example of getting PLG into the book sector. Thanks again for coming on. For people listening on Spotify, please leave us a review if you haven't done so. Again, helps us to boost the algorithms. And we're going to add a poll as usual to this podcast. Answer it. So I'm happy to hear what you thought of this episode. Thanks again, RJ.
Thank you, John. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for watching this show of the Grow Your B2B SaaS podcast. You made it till the end, so I think we can assume you like this content. If you did, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you like this content, feel free to reach out if you want to sponsor the show, if you have a specific guest in mind, if you have a specific topic you want us to cover, reach out to me on LinkedIn. More than happy to take a look at it. If you want to know more about Reditus, feel free to reach out as well. But for now, have a great day and good luck growing your B2B SaaS.